Hello and welcome to the AIM webinar series. AIM is the premier industry association for the automatic identification market. For nearly 50 years, companies have joined AIM to lead the growth of our industry. AIM serves as a hub for quality resources covering all types of barcode, RFID, NFC, Internet of Things, and mobile computing information. AIM delivers trusted resources that connect you to new customers and business partners. I would like to direct your attention to your monitor to review a few housekeeping items before we begin our presentation. First, you will note that you are muted throughout the presentation. Please stay on mute. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for Q&A. If you have a question, please chat those to me at AIM Member Services via the chat dialog option. We will answer as many questions as we can. Without further ado, I would like to thank Aware Innovations for their support of today's event. Our speakers for today's webinar are Tom King, who is IT Project Manager at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. We also will have Bob Fudge, who serves Aware Innovations as the VP of Public Sector Business, who will be speaking later on in the presentation. But first, to Tom King, who will be discussing achieving a real return on investment using RFID. Tom, take it away.
All right, thanks, sir. So first off, welcome everyone. It's a privilege and honor to speak to you today, and hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on what we accomplish here at the PTO and give you guys some lessons learned if you're in the throes or getting ready to start an RFID project. Just a quick picture of our main campus here. We're located in Alexandria, Virginia. Next slide, please. So the USPTO is one of the few fee-funded agencies in the federal government. So as I like to tell all my friends who tell me they pay taxes and pay my salary, I'm like, nope, unless you own a patent or a trademark, you don't pay for me, but I do appreciate the sentiments. We administer the trademark and patent laws. We do that through the examination of applications. An interesting note is less than 10% of all applications for a patent actually come to fruition or issued as a patent. We currently, 2 years ago, I believe, passed the 10 millionth patent that has been issued since the beginning of the USPTO. We have about 15,000 employees. You see broken down about 15,000 total users. About 13,000 are federal employees. The other 2,000 or so are contractors. Next slide. So we are located, as I mentioned earlier, I showed you that picture of our beautiful buildings down in Old Town Alexandria. If you ever get a chance to visit, it is open to the public. There's actually a museum there. I would certainly suggest that if you get a chance to bring your family, it's certainly worth paying a visit to. Obviously, in non-COVID times, as right now, you couldn't get into the building. We also have locations in Detroit, Denver, Dallas, and San Jose. Those came about as a part of the American Inventors Act, which was put in place about 10 years ago. And we currently utilize a storage facility in Borders, Pennsylvania, to house a second data center and also as a repository of copies of our patents. So just quickly, I wanted to show you a patent, a trademark, talk about a copyright just for a minute. On the left, you see is a patent from Abraham Lincoln, who went on to become president just a few years later. This is actually for how to raise a boat up out of the water slightly so that it could pass over shallow waters whenever the Mississippi was a little dry. On the right-hand side, you'll see a trademark for Coca-Cola. One thing to always keep in mind is the R, which means it's a registered trademark. A lot of people, and anybody can put the word trademark or can put the TM, but you want to see the R. That means it's actually registered. And an interesting fact about Coca-Cola is while they have a trademark for Coca-Cola, there is no patent for the formula of Coke. And the reason that is if they were to patent the formula, then it would be open to public. And so anybody could make Coca-Cola. And last, just about copyrights, they do not fall under the Patent and Trademark Office, but the head of the Patent and Trademark Office is actually the intellectual property administrator for the federal government. And they actually are involved with copyrights, which are actually administered through the Library of Congress. That's more for songs, books, things of that nature. So what was the problem at the PTO that we were trying to solve? Basically, we had a very labor-intensive system that engaged a large number of property accountability officers and PCs to track our assets. And as you can see, we had about $160 million worth of assets. It's everything from laptops to routers to smartphones to cameras, you name it, we have it at the agency. So that was the number one problem, was how do we reduce the amount of time and how do we also, at the same time, improve our asset management visibility and verification process. So just a little bit about the project. We did start this idea back in 2008 timeframe. We talked to senior management, posed the idea to them of a way to reduce the amount of work that we were spending on asset management and save some money over the years. It took us a couple of years, you can see, before we were allowed to put together our return on investment, which we'll talk about here in a couple of slides. It was finally approved in 2012 in our budget as a budget of initiative, and then eventually made it into the president's budget in FY 2014. At the end of FY 2014, we were able to award a contract to Digital Technologies Incorporated and Evanhoe and Associates. We teamed up to then work on our project. What's interesting is, even though we had done a cost estimate, we weren't very confident in our cost estimate. We were somewhere in the plus or minus 50% category, and we didn't really want to proceed if we found out the cost is going to be some outrageous amount of money. So what we did is we broke our project into 3 phases. And the only phase that we funded was actually phase 1, which is where we did the site work and developed the cost estimates. And at that point in time, after looking at those, the PTO goes, okay, well, this is fits within we actually had done a pretty good job of budgeting and estimating, and we actually were within what we expected and had money to pay for. Because frankly, let's be honest, at the end of the day, we can all make estimates all we want, but at the end, how much money do you actually have to spend on the project? So we were able to pull together and identify the funding to pay for the project. So we proceeded into phase 2, which was basically purchasing all the hardware, software, and then installing it on our main campus in Alexandria. And then also, as part of phase 3, once that was completed, we also branched out and installed the RFID system into all of our other locations. So today, our RFID system does cover both PTO space, and there is some leased or non-leased PTO space. There's a couple of warehouses that we have support contractors in that receive and ship a lot of IT equipment, and we have some RFID capabilities at their place as well. Next slide, please. Some of our goals, as we talked about earlier, we want to reduce the number of people involved in asset management. We wanted to reduce how long it took to actually perform their functions. Want to do, obviously, increase the accuracy of our data and also be able to reduce our losses. Some of our high-level requirements is obviously had to be cost-effective, and by minimally invasive, what we really mean is we didn't want to see a bunch of readers hanging out of the ceiling or that people could kind of see. We wanted kind of an out-of-sight, out-of-mind kind of system, which is important for an aesthetic point of view, because the building we lease and the building owners obviously wanted to make sure that RFID was compatible as well. And then finally, had to integrate with our system of record for asset management, which is Remedy, ITSM based on Remedy today. So just a little bit about implementation. Obviously, we had to identify all of our needs and benefits. We, as part of phase 1, we did all the RF site survey work and documentation, refined our requirements as well as our as-is to-bes, and then the contractor team came up with a solution, which obviously is where all the important stuff happens, and then we were able to implement, integrate, and now we're in the ongoing support phase. So also as part of engineering, implementation, obviously one of the major things you have to deal with is engineering. As you see on here, we call that a key aspect of our project. So some of the things we were looking at, some of the environmental conditions in our buildings, some of the physics of the radio frequency. What was interesting is we found out in certain corners of some of our buildings, we were picking up a large amount of interference from unknown sources or unknown and unnamed sources. So we actually had to adjust some of our locations in order to account for that. Obviously, the type of hardware that you use, depending on your application, the tags you're going to use and the performance of those, and we'll get a little bit into tags when we get to lesson learned. On the right-hand side is a drawing of pretty much a typical, how we typically laid out one of our floors. As you can see, we had 181 floors that we had to cover in total. One of the main things that we were doing was wanted to make sure we covered all in and out exits and entrances, emergency exits as well, just to make sure nothing slipped out the back door. And then, as you can tell from the green and also the orange circles, what we have done with our RFID system is we can't necessarily tell you a specific room that an asset is in, but we can tell you in that floor what zone that asset is in, so we can narrow it down to one particular corridor or one particular corner of the building, depending on what readers it's passed. And we use that information to then go out and look. A lot of times if someone reports something is missing and stolen, we know where we've seen it last time pass through. So that's how we utilize our RFID system. So you see here we have over 460 readers, nearly 1,200 antennas to kind of break down for you what we have in place. And we also originally purchased 10 of the Alien 9001 series handhelds that we use to scan our fixed assets. Because one of the things that we quickly realized is while it's great to have these readers up and be picking up assets as they move around and through a reader, but if an asset doesn't get picked up and moved around underneath a reader, it doesn't get read in that monthly time frame. And so one of the things that we needed in order to meet some of our long-term goals is we needed to be able to verify the assets monthly. So what we do is we also have as part of our inventory support team contract, we once a month go around and we actually take our RFID handheld readers and read all the tags for all the assets by floor. And then we go back and verify that against our database. So that's how we quickly figured out how to handle the problem or the issue. I won't really call it a problem. It just was something we did not realize is that our monitors and printers are not moving between locations on a regular basis. They typically get in someone's office and they stay there until they're either replaced or they break. So we dealt with that by using the fixed handheld readers. So just a quick picture of on the left-hand side, circled there in red, you'll see one of the 680s that's installed in the lobby. Pretty much all of our buildings have that same basic reader. The funny thing is, I had asked one day when we were doing the installation, hey, when are you guys going to get to our floor? And they're like, we already did your floor. I'm like, oh, you did? I said, yeah, it's downstairs. Go look. So I went and looked, didn't even realize that it had been put in place. And of course, the other readers are above the drop ceiling, so we don't see those. We do have one location that has physical readers you can see, and it's only because it's a staircase, and it was the easiest way to cover that staircase. So other than that, our readers are out of sight and out of mind. So it's just a quick drawing to show, I know there's a few geeks on here like myself who probably just love looking at these kind of drawings. This is actually something we did for, I believe, our security group when we were going through our ATO. But basically it just shows you there was a lot of complexity getting from a simple read at a reader to get it back through and from external sources, because it's external to our secured network, into our PTO network, and then those update RFID system and also to update our asset management system. All right, so return on investment, which is, I think, where most people are probably interested to see we actually were able to achieve. So here is our original estimate we put together in, let's say, the 2012-13 timeframe. You can see we were approximating about a $3 million cost, and based on the savings that we were going to see, it was going to take us about a little less than 3 years to achieve what we were looking for. PC labor, you can see we were really looking at that one at the time to be our major driver. Loss prevention as well, the percentages are all pretty high, but from a standpoint of where the PTO going to get most bang for the buck, it was from the people who are performing PC labor. One of the things to keep in mind at the Patent and Trademark Office is that our patent and trademark examiners generate revenue. As I like to say, with the P's, the T's, and O's, patents, trademarks, and other. I work in the other, which is basically everybody who spends the money that the P's and T's generate. So one of the things that we actually did not put in our return on investment, because we thought management might kind of accuse us of cooking the books, is how much time was going to be saved by these patent and trademark examiners that could then be reallocated to their time spent actually reviewing patent and trademark applications and ultimately issuing those, because that's what generates the revenue for the agency. We didn't even factor that into our estimate, because like I said, we're just kind of afraid that management's going to think we were trying to cook the books. But I think if you actually put that into the equation and figured it out, you probably would have seen us get a return on investment in half the time that you see on here. But again, we just did not include that. We figured we'd stick with the safe things. This is what you're doing today. We're going to remove that work and take it from that perspective. So going back to our original goals, here's some of the things that we accomplished. Reduce the number of PAOs and PCs. We reduced the PAOs from, as you see, 148 to 113. We didn't really expect a big drop in that one just because of the way we're structured, but the one we really expected a big drop in, and we did achieve that, was in our PCs. We went from over 800 to 275. Now, that number has actually increased by about 30 because of COVID, because the way the PTO has structured their asset management program, if you are on telework, which obviously all 13,000 or most of 13,000 of us are today full time, the structure of the PCs is slightly different, and therefore you have to create new ones. But on campus, we actually have 84 property custodians. And before, just on campus, we had somewhere north of 600 property custodians just on campus. So we really saw a huge decrease in the number of people involved and the amount of time that they spent. We want to reduce how long it took us to actually do asset management. We went from about 10 days to about 5 business days. Accuracy, we've obviously been able to have a great deal of accuracy in our data in our asset management system because we compare our data with what's in the RFID system, and if there's a discrepancy, we actually look into it and fix the discrepancy generally before a property custodian even knows there was an issue. One of the side benefits that I don't think we actually thought we were going to get out of this is we've been able to better monitor our contractors' performance. We have a separate contract, the OCIO does with the Patent and Trademark Office, that their contractor actually is the one who is receiving overwhelming majority of our assets, moving them, installing them, et cetera. And we always kind of knew things were maybe not being done exactly as we thought, just because we were like, well, this just doesn't look right, but we never could prove it. And with RFID system, we were able to quickly prove, hey, we know your guy moved it because here's everything that went on, and this asset wasn't properly physically scanned as it should have been. You know, we've taken care of it. And there was the contractor's management was very, very supportive. Obviously, the employees were not so happy with it, but they've quickly come around, realized that we're really, no one got fired over this, and that was one of the things that we were iterated with. And we're not going to fire anybody. We just want you to improve. But if you keep doing it wrong, then yeah, we're going to ask that you be removed from our contract because we can't have you continually causing us issues. Our PCs and PAOs, I think, are also very happy because the amount of work that they're doing today has been reduced greatly. We actually reduced their workload by about 90% based on our success with RFID. And our asset losses have come to near zero on campus. I do always like to qualify that with on campus because obviously if you're at home and you lose a piece of PTO equipment, there's not much RFID can do to help us there. But on campus, it is near zero. Kind of a funny story that actually helped us change some of our processes is we had a laptop that was suddenly reported as missing. And we were able to go back into the RFID system, and we saw this laptop go to the service elevator on one floor of one of our buildings, then across the catwalk to the other side of the building to the service elevator, down to the ground floor where it sat for about 8 hours. And then suddenly it went out the door, never to be seen again. So we went to security and said, could you pull the film and look and tell us what was happening around this time in this location? And what they discovered is our furniture movers had taken some surplus office furniture out of the building and transferred it to GSA for disposal. Well, come to find out, at least our best guess is that the drawer, we did talk to the movers, there was a drawer that was locked on the desk, I believe it was, that they weren't able to open because they didn't have a key. And what we all came to a quick conclusion is the laptop was locked in the drawer. And we went back and verified and talked to the person who reported as missing, and they did tell us that it was typically locked in a drawer that was not in use. And by the time we got to GSA, of course, the furniture had been destroyed and the laptop had been destroyed. So we obviously had to write off our records. But a lesson learned for us, something we didn't realize was going on, is we changed our process with our office furniture move folks. And it's like, hey, if you move anything that is locked and you cannot open it, you must, with a key, you must physically open it. You have to pry bar it or whatever to make sure there's no assets. So we know what happened with that one laptop, but we've had many discussions since that occurred about how many other laptops and iPhones and other small devices that probably had met the same doom, and we just never had a way of capturing it. So that's an example of again, something that we didn't necessarily expect to to get out of it, which we did. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick pictorial I like to show. You can see prior to RFID being implemented, we were seeing a large number of PC report changes coming in. We equate every change with basically an error, because it means a property custodian has reviewed the report, which they do get in real time, and that report is not accurate with what's in the system. And you can see in the first quarter of 2020, prior to the pandemic, we had reduced that all the way down to about 276 errors that had occurred in the first quarter of FY 2020, which would have been October, November, and December of last year, of 2019. So we've seen a great reduction in the number of errors. And a lot of this is, like I said, errors don't still occur, but a lot of this is because of the automation between our systems and RFID letting us know, hey, this thing was last seen at this location, and it doesn't match up with what we have in our inventory system. We're able to go out and find it and quickly update the system before, again, as I mentioned earlier, for a property custodian even knows there's an issue that has occurred. And not that it's really as germane, and one of the reasons we stopped tracking this is we're down into like the 20s right now for a number of requests, but obviously no one's on campus, so it's just a different world right now. So this is an updated estimate that we did at the beginning of end of 2019, sometime around that time frame, 1/31/2020. We wanted to go back and just see, okay, how well did we do? Again, we just basically took our original metrics, went back and looked at everything. While you can see here, we've achieved a little bit more than we expected, and we've got a little bit quicker return on investment. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we didn't take into account is how much of this has been work that we're saving in assets has actually been redirected towards patent and trademark application reviewing, and probably has actually increased our revenue. So that's always a good thing, because again, like I said earlier, the P's and T's keep all of those O's funded at the agency, so we do appreciate them. Some things that we've done since RFID has been deployed, as I mentioned, one of the things we do is check the location in RFID against what the official system says. We had to put together some automatic ways of doing that with some flags and checks. Our asset verification, we actually now, and we changed our PC reports greatly because of this, we actually used to show property custodians every asset that they were responsible for on a monthly basis, and then quarterly we would ask them to verify all 100% of those assets. With RFID's help, we've been able to reduce that, and we've actually changed the reports now. If we electronically verify an asset, then we don't even ask the property custodians to check it. We just ask them now on a quarterly basis, or excuse me, on a semi-annual basis instead of a quarterly basis, but on a semi-annual basis to check and certify any of the assets that we could not electronically verify. And there are some things, for example, a camera, which we happen to track. There's no way that we're going to electronically, it's physically not possible to put an RFID tag on it, and it's just something that's not going to be verified any other way. So we do have some, I believe the number out of the 122,000 plus assets, I believe there are about 4,000 assets at the agency that are not RFID tagged. And there's about 200 of those that we actually were in the process of putting the RFID tags on before COVID. So we'll catch up with those once we're all back in the office. We've also migrated to the latest version of ItemAware, which is software that we use to track all of our assets. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in lessons learned, but we've also implemented 4 additional RFID tag designs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. So some of the things that we're looking at doing in the future is we want to auto-sign our location and user data. This is one of those trust factors, I think, to be honest with you. We became very comfortable with being able to trust RFID to help us in a lot of areas, but there's some that I think are going to take more time with us getting more and more comfortable and making sure we have more checks and balances to be able to move forward with some of these things. We're actually extending RFID down to our supply warehouse. We receive a lot of papers and forms and toner cartridges and the such that we then ship either to campus or to people's homes. And one of the things that we ran into or have had an issue with over the years is the forms or printers or cartridges rather or documents and paper becoming old, not being able to be used, and having to be destroyed. And so we're trying to go to more on a on-demand type supply system. And one of the key parts of that will be once we extend the RFID to the warehouse. We're upgrading our handheld scanners. Currently, the ones we have obviously are end of life. So we're moving to the ALR H460s. And one of the things that was discussed pre-COVID was actually extending RFID to track conference attendees. I know many of us have been to conferences where they give you the name badge with the little chip in it, and when you go into a session, you hold your tag up to the board, and it checks that you're there and lists you as an attendee. Well, that's one of the things. We do have a lot of conferences at the agency, and one of the things we're looking at doing is to actually use RFID to do that kind of work as well. So let's talk a little bit about lesson learned. So the first two bullets here, expectations and gaining buy-in and support from senior management, those actually kind of go hand in hand, because after you sell them on the idea and get their support, then you have to manage your expectations. One of the things that we were constantly doing was meeting with our senior leadership at the agency and level setting what RFID would or would not do for us, to make sure that I would occasionally get a phone call about someone about some outlandish thing that RFID system was going to solve. And I'm like, no, that's not what's going to happen. This is how it works. So it was a constant feeding of information and making sure that they were aware of what was going to happen, what wasn't going to happen, when it was going to happen, and all those types of things. So that's very important. It really just comes down to communication and making sure that not only senior management, but also your customers understand what's coming down the road and how it's going to impact them. We have three unions at the PTO. One of them is very powerful, the Patent Office Professional Association. If you have unions in your workplace, I would encourage you to engage them early. One of the things we did not do at the PTO, because management did not want to be quite honest about it, was to engage our unions at the beginning of the process. That caused some minor delays, and minor delays meaning Tom had to do a lot of paperwork and produce a lot of documentation that could have been avoided if we had just talked to the unions up front. There was some misunderstanding on the union's behalf and some of their members on what we were and were not tracking. There was concerns that we were reading people's brain waves. There was concerns that we were reading your credit card. There were concerns that we were going to be reading equipment at your home and how was it going to impact my family, on and on and on and on and on. And those things could have been much more easily addressed up front, I think, if we had just engaged the unions. Be flexible, be patient. As we all know, every great plan has potholes that it runs into. You just have to adapt and move on. As we talked about a little bit earlier, some of our buildings had a fair amount of RF interference, and so we ended up having to move some of our readers, or where we plan on putting readers. And then also, once we got up into the ceilings and got a little closer look, we ran into some minor issues here and there that also required us to either bring in another contractor to, for example, break through a concrete wall or brick wall for us or cinder block wall. So there are always things that you're going to run up against, and just be flexible, be patient with the process. Like I said, it took us a long time to get management to buy into it. And once we finally got to go, it seemed like things went very fast at that point. And the last thing is tags. As I mentioned earlier, we start out with one type of tag, and there's a lot of work that goes into figuring out the type of equipment you have. Does it have plastic covers? Does it have metal covers? Is it going to be in a lot of heat? And the PTO made a fairly short-sighted decision, hindsight always being 2020, and then we said, you know what, we just want to deal with one type of tag. And so we got one type of tag, and they generally worked well. The problems we ran into, for example, on our laptops is the tags, because a lot of us carry our laptops to and from work, when you put them in and out of your laptop bag, they were snagging. And it didn't take long before they started ripping. And of course, when they start ripping, if you damage the antenna, then you're no longer able to get reads off of them. So we were replacing a fair number of RFID tags, and we quickly realized we needed to do a different type of tag for laptops. So what we ended up doing is that the RFID tag itself is physically the same, but the cover that goes over it is much wider. So the edges don't stick up. They lay down flat. They go in and out of bags, and it resolved that problem pretty quickly. We also, in our data center, have had to implement different tags. We actually have two different types of tags in our data center. One that's basically kind of a hang tag, and one that now sticks on the edge of the servers, because what we found, again, with our tags is a couple of things were happening. One, they were so thick that when they would stack servers very tightly on top of each other, they would again tend to grab and rip. They also wouldn't read well with the RFID handheld readers because of basically being squished between two pieces of metal. And finally, the heat that was being generated was actually causing the glue to melt, and they were just basically falling off. So we ended up having to adopt a couple of different types of tags that we now use in our data center. And we've also implemented some other tags that we use for things like, believe it or not, we actually have a set of 60 keys that we have decided are so important that we actually track those keys using RFID as well. All right, at this point, I am going to turn it over to Bob Fudge from Amware.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon. This is Bob Fudge, the Vice President for Evanho / Aware Innovations. It's kind of confusing how we're kind of set up. Evanho is a federal contractor. We support the DoD, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and Aware Innovations is basically our commercial-facing entity that focuses on AIDC solutions. And you can see all the things that we do there. We do it as a part of Evanho, and Aware Innovations and Evanho supports, like I said, DLA, USPTO. We've done some work for a couple large commercial companies. Next slide, please. Itemware is the software product that we are using at multiple locations. It is a broad-based asset visibility solution. Really, we're tracking everything from laptops at the USPTO to Abrams tanks at Anniston Army Depot. So it can be used to take feeds from RFID tags, GPS, cellular, barcodes, whatever your AIDC read solution is. We ingest that and we provide data about those tags. That's really all I have to say about it. So, next slide.
Thank you, Bob, for that information, and Tom, thank you for the presentation. I will move forward to our question and answer session. We do have some questions for you, Tom. I will get to those right now, but the audience still has time to chat some questions over to me as I get to those. So, Tom, if you're ready.
Sure, shoot.
Okay, first question we have is, how long did you pilot this project?
We didn't actually have a pilot phase. What we did is in our phase one, after we did all of the studies, we basically jumped into going straight into installation, implementation and installation. We didn't really have what we call a pilot. Now, I will be honest, as soon as the first building was up and running and turned on, we're all playing with the new toy, but we didn't actually pilot it.
Another question we have is, what was your biggest surprise or something you did not anticipate once the project was completed?
Oh, the tags. that was the number one eye-opening. And tags, for a number of reasons. I only touched on the fact that we implemented multiple new types. One of the other things that went on with tags, and I should have pointed out on the presentation, there's a couple slides that it says Department of Commerce and it says CD number. One of the requirements from Commerce is that all bureaus, and Patent and Trademark Office is one of many bureaus, Census being one of the others, NIST being one of the others, that is under the umbrella Department of Commerce. Well, one of the things that Commerce requires you to do is to use CD tags to track your assets. Well, at the beginning, we were, quite frankly, didn't want to go tell Commerce what we were doing, so we had to figure out a way to get around the use of a CD tag. And originally we had two different tags in our system. So we were tracking CD tags, RFID tags, and serial numbers, because obviously when you go to a manufacturer, they only care about the serial number. And we came up with a way quickly to consolidate our CD and RFID tag into one, which has been a godsend. But I think the whole tag issue was one that we just did not think out completely and think out well. We made a decision, probably driven a little bit more by money, trying to be cheap on the tags. And in the long run, it just ended up costing us more money because we had to buy the more expensive tags anyway, and then we had to go back and re-tag assets. So that was the eye-opening one for, I think, for me, from a negative, from a bad but not really bad point of view, I guess, because there could be worse things that could have happened.
Yeah. And speaking of money, we have a question. Can you give a breakdown of the $3 million price of the project, like the top 3 or top 5 line items, for example?
I tell you what, can we get a I'll be happy to, I can email that to you. I don't have it right here. It'll take me a few minutes to find it on my computer, but yes, I do have that. I can break it down for you.
Okay, great. And the person that sent me that question, just to them, if they want to send me their email, I can forward that information to them. Another question we received, this is tag related, is how does the system handle RFID tags attached to visitors related materials, like foreign tags, I guess?
It'll read them, but because we don't, because we're not interested in them, we just ignore them. They're just not fed to us. So one of the things that I didn't touch on, I mentioned briefly, but I didn't really get too much into detail, is we actually have our asset management system, which is official on a record, and then we have RFID. Obviously, RFID is reading anything that's an RFID tag under the sun. An example, up in Boyers, Pennsylvania, our data center and our storage facility is in an Iron Mountain controlled facility, underground facility. And I was up there when we first installed RFID, and we were walking around doing some reads with our handheld readers, and we went next to a concrete wall, and the freaking thing just went crazy. It sounded like a Geiger counter had just hit a vein of gold. And I'm sitting there watching the reads, and I'm quickly sensing there's a data center on the other side of the wall that I'm picking up the tags, because their tags were in a sequence that you could tell, like, oh, well, this must be location based on how their tags are set up. So we do pick up any other reads, but we just ignore them, because in our system, the key between the two is the CD number tag. And so unless the RFID readers report back a hit on a CD tag that's then reported to our official system, we just ignore it. It's, to be honest with you, I don't even believe, though I'd have to go back and double check, I don't even think our fixed readers, they may pick them up and read it, but I don't even believe they transmit that data back to the RFID database. But I would have to triple confirm that, because I could be speaking incorrectly. We may just get it and then we're just purging it at that point.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question that we have is, you talked about this a few times in the presentation, but how did you deal with the concerns employees had with this new system? So we actually had to do, Google came in very handy when looking for articles out there from the community talking about the safety of RFID, talking about one of the things that we pointed out was what you were being subject to was less than the radiation that came from your handheld phone that you're holding up to your head. So I'm trying to remember now that there were a handful of specific things they asked about. That was one of them, was physical safety. Was it going to cause them some physical harm due to RFID? Again, one of the things we also pointed out, not only did we go back to the studies that showed it was safe, we also pointed out all the places that RFID technology is used today that they're being subject to outside of even the workplace. And as far as like the reading of credit cards, one of the things that we showed is that the type of readers and the way the security that's set up on them, our readers aren't even possible for ours to read your credit card, even if you hold it within, because those are typically near field, even if you held it up to a reader, which our ceilings are 8 to 10 feet, in some cases 30 feet high. So unless you got up on a ladder and held your credit card near it, it wouldn't even be able to read it anyway. But even if you did that, we still couldn't read your credit card. So it was just basically going out and finding a lot of information. And that's what I said, I think if we had engaged, because that really came about as part of the union engagement,
And I think if we had just engaged the unions earlier and put that out there, I just think it would have been, we would have gotten questions, but they would have been not as quite a contentious relationship between the unions and us at that point in time, because we would have been upfront and honest with them. But as everyone knows who deals with unions, sometimes that management just doesn't like to do that. And frankly, the only reason it even came up is one of our folks was tagging assets, because, you know, we obviously had to go into people's offices and tag monitors and printers and such. And the person was in tagging an asset with an RFID tag, and somebody was working late that night and walked in on them, and, you know, obviously startled the individual, as a female. And so she was very concerned about somebody in her office first. And then secondly, once she found out what they were doing, she's very concerned about the technology being used. So it was a small number of people, but again, if we had just dealt with it up front, I don't think it would have been much of an issue. But Google and all the research that was out there, and we did turn to both Evanhoe and DTI and ask them questions about it, so they were able to provide us with some information as well. So all those sources were used in order to quell concerns.
Hey, Tom, can I piggyback on your answer? I think
Sure.
You held a couple, I guess I would call them Q&A sessions, where you had people come into the conference room. We all fielded and answered their questions. I think that was helpful to give people an opportunity to publicly voice their questions. Other people may have had the same questions. So kind of a change management step when you first started was helpful.
I agree. I had actually forgotten we'd done that.
Okay, great. Another question we have, I'm not sure if you can totally answer this, but how do you or the organization reconcile the RFID asset database with the larger asset management system? Did ItemAware write an API to automate that, or daily, weekly uploads? And how large a role did their reluctance to introduce another system software play in the project rollout?
So I'll answer the last one first. It really wasn't an issue with bringing in a new software to do this. And obviously the RFID system could be our asset management system. There just have to be some tweaks and changes made to it, but in order to meet some of our federal requirements. But one of the issues we have from the government side is there are some mandates that some things we're just required to do, and within commerce, they use a system called Sunflower for asset management, and we're the only bureau that doesn't use it. So we have a specific exemption, but the exemption is very specific in what we can use. So unfortunately, if we probably had our druthers, we would have just switched out our whole asset management system with it, but that just wasn't on the table. As far as updates, it's done on a regular. I don't want to say it's done at least daily. I want to say it's done more frequently. I want to say it's actually done. It's done every couple of hours. I forget the exact time frame, but yes, between our folks at Amware and our Remedy support contractor, they wrote a link between the two systems. So it's all automated, because we, from an asset perspective, obviously have to send to them any new CD numbers that are added to the system. And we also send them any changes to CD numbers, and obviously they send us back the last known location data. So, now that I think about it, it's done daily, and I'll tell you why. Is one of the things that the union was concerned about was that we were tracking employee movement, which obviously we're tracking assets, not employees. But in order to basically alleviate that as an issue, we agreed with the unions that we would only use the last date that's in the RFID system will get transferred over or transmitted over. So it is once a day, because it's about, say, 12:30 in the morning. It basically will send us all the updates that occurred the prior day, the last known location of that asset. So as I'm thinking about it, that's how it actually worked because of the agreement with them. So yes, the two contractors had to work together. That didn't take long, actually. It was a pretty quick process in order to get the developers to make that all work. And one of our problems with Remedy now is, I don't know how familiar everyone is with Remedy, we're actually using a very old version. We're using 7.6. And it doesn't actually allow for certain connections because we actually want to just have a database connection. So in our new version of whatever we replace it with, which should be awarded this month, we'll be upgrading all of our interfaces with RFID to make it more efficient. At that point, you might see more frequent updates.
Okay, and another question we received is, what encoding scheme or schemes are you using for the tags?
Bob?
Wait a second, I'm the BD guy. I'm not the technical guy. If we can get an answer back to you.
Yeah, we can get an answer back on that one.
All right, sounds good. Well, that wraps up our Q&A session. Thanks, Tom and Bob, for your time and insights today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience for their active participation. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will be sending out an email with more information once the webinar is uploaded and available to view, and also a survey. So thanks very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.